Trauma. Everyone has it. No one talks about it. It seems easier to stay silent, ignore it, or stuff it than it does to honor it, learn from it, and finally heal. Trauma is debilitating, yet so often we suffer in silence. Trauma is not meant to be battled alone, and we are no longer going to suffer in silence. Together, we are creating a safe place to speak, to share our stories and grow our strength as we heal. Together, we are giving a voice to those who have been silenced, bringing darkness into light and letting God use our stories. Today, we find ourselves again. We relight our spark and let it light up the world. STOPSIS is a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating on issues of trauma and trafficking, as well as the amazing power of the healing journey. Welcome to STOPSIS. Hey, you guys. Big welcome back to STOPSIS, Stop Suffering in Silence, where we create the brave space to talk about hard things and the healing that comes through walking and talking through it. My name is Denise Walsh, and I have with me Rachel Timothy.
Hey guys, thanks for being here.
And today we are going to talk about pivot points. Now, for me, a pivot point is when we make a decision, because oftentimes we're waffling in this space that's like, I don't want to be here, but I don't really know what to do. And I have heard this in lots of areas of life. I'm in a relationship that I don't really like, but I don't know what to do. Or I'm in a job I don't really like, but I don't know what to do. And it's very easy to stay someplace we don't really like because we don't really know what to do. And that could be maybe a rock bottom. That could be, it could be considered a lot of different, like a dark night of the soul, perhaps. But at some point, we make a decision to move, to do something different, to make a shift. And that is what I call the pivot point, because I know people who've lived in this restless state of like, I don't like this, but I don't know what to do for decades. And honestly, generations, because they just don't even know that change is possible. And so if you have not yet read Rachel's book, OpenBlindEyes, please read it. It is in the the show notes or the description box below. And you can also listen to her story from the Dreamcast that's linked below as well. But let's just jump right in. Like, Rachel, we have all had many pivot points throughout our journey. And I'd love to hear a few stories that you may have of when you said, all right, I'm going to make a shift, or I'm going to make a change, and then we'll talk about how others can get to that place too.
Yeah. So first of all, the first thing that comes to my mind is the first pivot point was not a choice. I don't know, the time in 2014 when my body decided, here, this is what happened to you as a child. Here's all these memories. Making that reality of everything that I had been through and facing it. It was a pivot point in my life. And honestly, at that time, it took me down a dark path. It took me down the path of realizing I need healing. I need help. I'm not okay. All these like terrible feelings, but feelings that I had pushed down for so long. And it was my body's way of saying, nope, we have to change this. So that's kind of my first pivot point.
Well, it's interesting to think about that. Sometimes pivot points are made for us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it's an external thing that shifts us. I mean, we talked about that last week with forgiveness, and we're like going along our path, and then all of a sudden something derails us into something we didn't expect. Your flashback experience is kind of one of those experiences where you're like, I'm going on the road and living my life, and all of a sudden,
yeah, unexpectedly, you woke up that morning not knowing that this is what's going to change the course of your life, and it did. And I guess at that point, it was just a matter of making decision day in and day out after that towards healing. And I think we've all seen the picture of what healing looks like, and it's It's squiggles, it's all over the place. And that was the journey I started on that day. And I kind of feel like that. So my first pivot point was not my choice. But then from there on out, the choices that I made daily started to make pivot points. And you and I were talking actually this morning, we were talking about how how the pivot points work. And the way that I envision it in my head is I chose, not every time by any means, because I made some really bad decisions, but to the best of my ability, I made good choices towards my healing, whether it was who I put myself around, whether it was trying to focus on my kids and making sure I'm choosing right for me so that it then trickles down to them. All these different choices that I was trying to make, trying to keep my eyes on God, that it was like I was putting bricks on a teeter totter to where finally at one point I put a brick on and all of my feelings and emotions shifted with it. And it was like, that was my huge pivot point of I now feel the difference. I can now see the difference around me. It was like everything just opened up and freedom was on the other side.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so my guess is that when the flashbacks came, you weren't immediately like, oh, I'm going to heal now. Because there is a bit of grief that needs to happen, right? Some shock and
Shock.
awe,
Yeah.
some reality, like, honesty, getting out what you were experiencing. You don't just go, that hurt, now I'm healing. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a grief portion in there where it's okay and important to like talk about this stuff and get it out of your system and let people know what's happening. Go to that counselor or granny in a safe place. But we know we can't stay there.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so you had a couple times where you said, all right, I know I can't stay. I mean, it maybe is a daily choice. I know I can't stay here. So what can I do today to take that right next step?
Yeah, and as you're talking, I, for some reason, am envisioning like a house that had been caught on fire. And, that's kind of when trauma happened and having to go through and sift through everything and clean it out and process everything. That's kind of a part of it that you have to go through. And you don't just reach that pivot point the next day. You have to go through the gunk first. And that's what a lot of us want to avoid. I tried to avoid it, those quick fixes, and you just can't. You have to go through it in order to get to the other side. And then I think you realize you're at a point where you've maybe been sifting through the same stuff over and over again, and you realize, okay, I've been here a while. It's time to make a step forward. And sometimes it's having a realization of, wow, look how far I've come. I am on the other side, and I didn't even notice it. And then your feelings kind of react. I am free, and I didn't even notice it. But sometimes there's, like, for me, whenever I started speaking and sharing my story, that was a pivot point. Like a light just went off in my heart. And it was like God was saying, this is what I had planned for you all along. Here is like these blessings of what I had planned. And I could breathe. And it just felt like a turning point in my life of purpose for all of that muck that I had just gone through. Now I'm moving in the direction of purpose and blessing.
Yeah. I I feel like the pivot point or that rock bottom or that decision to say, all right, I'm not going to stay rumbling through the burnt ashes of this old
Mhm.
house. I'm going to start building a new one, really.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a couple of things that remind me of. I used to teach anger management group back in my community mental health days. And one of the things that we talked about in either addiction or counseling or in anger management with domestic violence is the cost of staying the same. The cost of violence, the cost of anger, the cost of addiction. Like, what are you losing staying the same? Because so often we justify it. We justify why we act the way we do. We justify our finances. We justify our health. We justify things saying, well, it's because my house burnt down. And
Exactly.
and so it's okay that I stay here, or it's okay that I'm still angry because my childhood back, I'm thinking of some of the cases that I had, they had poor childhoods and they were abused or had violent homes, and so they grew up and did the same, and so we would justify it, and they would say, oh well, it's okay because I so anyway we justify it and we make it kind of more okay in our head than it certainly ever is, and really having that radical honesty of saying, this is not okay, this is not the way I want life to be, and I've got to do something with it, was a pivot point for a lot of those folks because they had justified it for a long, long time.
Yes, that was me. That was me with my eating disorder. Let me tell you. So my eating disorder was my comfort. It was something that was my coping skill from the very moment those flashbacks came. It helped with the pain in my gut. I don't know how to explain it, but it was what I used when things would get so hard and so painful. It seemed to be my comfort. And even though it didn't last for long, like the comfort didn't last for long, it's still what I went to. And, I heard comments about like how my body was changing. I was getting unhealthy. I was malnourished, all these things, but it didn't matter because I needed it. I had to have it. I did not think I could live without it. And so I feel like you and I had started talking and you started speaking life into me about possibilities of the future. And so up until that point, I was living every day as if it could be my last. And I remember when I would say goodbye to people like that I loved or whatever, I would have a really hard time because I couldn't picture the future. I couldn't picture seeing them again. Like that's how much of a dark place I was in. And so when I started talking to you and you started pushing me to dream and to think bigger and to see what God had planned for me, I started realizing I need to be healthy. And so January of very first of January, I made that decision. I'm going to go ahead and lay down this eating disorder and start eating 4 meals a day. And I told you about it. I told Granny about it. And I think the building up the confidence and the speaking life into me led to where I felt like it was possible and I could lay it down. But once I did, I cannot even tell you the transformation that took place because it was like a barrier between me and God was broken down. I had used that as my comfort for so long. I begged God to change my circumstances, to change the pain in my heart, to change all these things, but yet I wasn't willing to trust him to change it until like I wouldn't let go of that comfort that I had until I saw him move. And he was looking for me to let go of that before he would move. And when I let go of that eating disorder and I trusted him, that was my biggest pivot point. Everything shifted in that moment. I could dream, I could look forward to the future. I was feeling better. I could use the tools that had been poured into me all of these years. I now was able to utilize them. I remember years ago, I was sitting on my bed and I had just had an awful, awful flashback. And back then, I didn't have a way to cope myself, like other than the eating disorder. I couldn't get the pain to stop. And I would reach out to person after person, and I didn't believe my prayers were really going above the ceiling. So I would reach out to my Christian friends and I would say, will you pray for me? Will you pray for me? Maybe your prayers will make this pain go away. And I remember I reached out to this old woman in our church, just a beautiful Christian woman who she sends out a scripture every single day to probably hundreds of people. Like she's just got that type of spirit. And I reached out to her and I said, please pray for me. I am hurting so bad from this flashback and I can't get the pain to go away. And she said, is there something in your life that you need to change in order to bring the comfort of God? And I was like, how dare you? You don't know what I'm going through. You don't know how burnt my house is and how much muck I'm walking through. You sweet old lady, like, no, you don't get it. And I sat there angry. And then when I finally, years later, let go of that eating disorder and allowed God to sweep in and clean me out and renew my spirit and all those things that he promises us in the Bible, then I got what she was saying. I was prohibiting him from being that comfort I needed all along. And that was my pivot point.
Yeah, amen. I mean, then it's like, then it's not one foot in and one foot out. You are
Right.
full blown headed in a direction because you're committed. You're not just thinking about it, you're committed to actually taking action there. And so you brought up another point. So, one piece of the puzzle for making this shift and saying, not in my house, not with my kids, not with me, like I'm doing things differently. I just think of some other friends that we've talked to who've said their pivot point was when they had children and they were like, I'm not allowing these generational patterns to continue. Like, no, it's like that line in the sand. Part of it is really recognizing just how bad it is. And
Yeah.
again, it's like that, like shining a light into the darkness and saying, no, like this, I can't keep justifying this because it's drastically impacting me and my family and my friends and my mission.
Mm-hmm.
The other side of the coin is seeing what's possible and having hope for the future. And so one of the reasons why we start, like when we first started working together, I was like, we could talk about the eating disorder all day long. And guess what's that's going to do? It's going to make it bigger because
Mm-hmm.
we become what we think about. So instead of thinking about the eating disorder and why it's there and all of the things that we counselors like to do, we focused on what do we want instead and made that grow bigger. And this reminds me of two examples, and then I'll love to hear your story. But when I worked with at CMH, I had several kids who were the first ones to graduate high school. And so I actually saw them for 4 or 5 years, like once a month or something like that, because they weren't necessarily in crisis that whole time. But what was so cool is that at first they didn't even know that it was possible for them to graduate high school because it was not in their worldview. Their parents didn't graduate high school, their grandparents didn't graduate high school. They just only knew what they knew. So what we had to do was we had to tell them stories of people in a similar situation who didn't have anyone in their family go to high school. We had to find stories of people that did go to, what I mean, that finished high
Mm-hmm.
school. And we had to find stories of people who that were successful and again, fill their mind with possibilities because that grew their worldview. And then another example is when I did missions in Africa. And so again, if you've ever been to Africa, you guys, it's a shocking place to be because there's like a big city with bustling energy and, electricity and jobs. And then 2 hours away is a village with nothing. And these people, I mean, they maybe know, but it like didn't seem like they were like, oh my gosh, 2 hours that way, you could get a job. And like there's all this hope and possibility. But what we saw when we did home visits was just lost soul, like no life, and they had kind of given up. And so while we're brainstorming with our mission group, we're like, how can we bring life back to this village? Like, how do we help them know that they're not stuck here, that there are options? And the only thing we could really come up with at that time was books and stories. Again, it's like helping people to see themselves in somebody else that has experienced success or gotten to where they want to be. So it's like the two, it's both sides of the coin. It's really
Mm-hmm.
being honest about I don't want to be here anymore. But then it's also having a hope for the future and seeing yourself 3 steps ahead so you have the courage to make the change.
Yeah, I love that. And I think when you and I first started talking, it was like I would share with you, oh, we would talk about like, what did I eat or whatever, and yeah, all those things. But I had chaos going on in my life that was just, I didn't want to talk about food. Like my house was on fire, is how it felt. And you want to talk about what I'm eating, like it just, I couldn't even go there. But until we fixed some of the other stuff, it was like I realized the reason to hope is bigger than the pain that I'm feeling. And we kind of started dreaming of a life without an eating disorder.
So that's a great point. We, what did we have to fix first? What did you have to like put in order or reorganize or shift or put on the shelf to decrease the chaos so that you could dream again?
I needed to I needed to get control back. I think that was the biggest thing was you had taught me how to take control of my thoughts that then lead to, your actions that then lead to feelings. And once I realized I had control of those things, because I didn't leading up to that, I would have flashbacks, I would have triggers. I felt like my brain was controlled by somebody else. And I would write that in my journal like, I don't know what to do. I feel like I could have best intentions today, but if my brain decides to have a flashback, I'm screwed. That's how I felt. And so when you gave me tools to take control back, then that's when things started to shift for me and I was able to see a future.
Oh, it's fascinating because it doesn't mean everything around you got better before you got better, or
You're
like
right.
there was no chaos anymore. Life was peaceful. Now I can get better. It
No,
wasn't like that. It was you, even in the midst of the chaos, creating your own peace in a sense.
exactly. And for years, I had prayed for God to change my circumstances. But what needed to change was within me and the strength that I had to face the circumstances. And then the faith that I had to give a lot of it over, all of it over to Him. That's what needed to change.
Wow. And I think we could all say that we all are in a place sometimes, and we've all been in a place. I mean, we're humans. We've all had these
Mhm.
times where we're uh, like I need more money, or whatever it is. We pray for the external thing rather than praying for the internal thing, and or thanking God that the external thing is already there, because gratitude also shifts what our eyes see and what our subconscious picks up. Because
Mm.
as we learned in 90-day U-turn, your reticular activating system is the brain's filter. And so again, if we are like thinking about all the bad stuff, then our filter is going to notice it because that's what it thinks is important. And so we want to start really thinking about what would life look like in 5 years. But we didn't start there. What would life look like in 2 weeks? What would life look
Right.
like if you felt healthy and strong? What would life look like if you could volunteer at school and not have to take a nap? What would life look like if you had energy throughout the day, or patience, or whatever the case may be? And then we could start thinking about those things. And that's
Hmm.
biblical too, isn't it?
It sure is. And yeah, what is it? Think on things that are good and right and holy and true and noble and all those things. Keep your mind on those things. And I remember reading that scripture and even thinking to myself, I can't. Like, yeah, right. How can I do that when I am being like flushed with flashback after flashback? It felt impossible. And so once I was given those tools to take control back of my mind, it was like the floodgates opened and here we go. Let's start to enjoy life.
Okay, so people are going to ask, what are those tools?
Yeah.
They're like, okay, I want to get some chaos, decrease the chaos in my life. What would you say are some of the tools that you use to take your thoughts captive? And then I know we've got some other things to share too, but
Um, the biggest thing for me was shifting my focus. And then like I could look at a flashback all day long, but if I shift my focus to something else, and it sounds simple, and it's those affirmations and it's the hypnosis and the meditations and the things, like filling myself up with these things to where it's like the reticular activating whatever, my filter was pinging that to the front of my mind nonstop. And I remember when I did the 90-day U-turn the first time, and I started voicing out loud some of these dreams that I had kept quiet for so long and had felt stupid saying. All of a sudden, even just voicing it was like empowering. And it got me excited for the next day. And flashbacks would come, and then I would have to remind myself, no, I have this purpose now. I have this dream. I told so and so that I was going to be working on this. and that accountability was there. And it was like steps leading to it. Like once you allow yourself to think it and you voice it, and then you start taking some action towards it, when a stumbling block comes, you're able to remember how you felt the day before, and you want to get back there. So you change your thoughts back to where you were. And it doesn't take the pain away, but it helps you get back on track faster.
Yeah. There's two ways to shift your feelings. Oftentimes we wait to feel better to do something different. But it's like this triangle, right? Thoughts, behaviors, and feelings. It's the cognitive behavioral triangle. And you can impact your thoughts, and you can do that by saying, what is true? What do I want? What are some of the other, you take the thought captive, and then there's a whole list of questions that you can go through to decide, how do I feel when I think this thought? How do I feel when I think this other thought? What other possibilities are there? What are my options? Because again, when we're stuck in that monkey mind, we feel stuck. We feel like there's nothing that we can do, and that's never true. So what are my possibilities? What can I do right now? And even writing those out, so that way when it happens again, you have a list, right, of things that you can do and what you can control and that kind of thing. But the other part of the triangle that I think is super fascinating is the behaviors. So oftentimes people would ask me, how do you stay so motivated? And I would say, I don't. I do it anyway. And so the behaviors that are healthy, eating 4 meals a day, exercising, journaling, listening to the hypnosis, drinking your water, all of those things, the behaviors, even if you don't quite feel like it, done consistently enough, impact your feelings. And that's like that teeter-totter that you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what made a huge difference for me. That's what helped change my perspective.
Yeah.
So shifting it just a little bit from what you're saying, and kind of taking what we were talking about last week, but also as part of my pivot point, was when I started to understand what God's character is throughout my journey, and forgiving him. We didn't really talk about God and forgiving him last week, but it struck me that, just as you were talking, how impactful that was in my pivot point, to be able to go to God's word and not just look at it as factual information, but look at it as, this is God's character, his heart, that I am learning more about him, and then I can implement it into how he views me as well. And when I started to read the scriptures and see that God is a protective God, well, then when I apply that to my life, and I go back and I see, well, I was trafficked for however many years, how could God be a protective God? Well, if you look at my heart, there's every worldly reason why I should be an angry, bitter, messed up person, and I'm not. So I know for a fact God protected my heart in those moments. If you look more at scripture, you see that he is just, and justice is just who he is. Well, I have not received justice as far as the world goes, but I can trust and know that time will come where those perpetrators will face justice. And maybe they are right now, and I don't know, in whatever way God is doing it. But just the different ways that I started to realize who God is, not who my abusers told me he was, but who he actually is, helped pivot me in a relationship with him that I longed for so long, but I just couldn't see God the way other people saw him. And that was a big changing point for me as well.
It reminds me of kind of clearing the cobwebs and seeing more clearly. So rather than being clouded by all the pain, being able to see who God is allows you to have that hope.
Yeah. And I felt like, in a way, scripture was lying to me for all these years, because I could tell you all these scriptures about how good God is, but my life wasn't good. So it's like it didn't fit. Like maybe God didn't fit in my life. But then when I was able to truly study it and see how his character is fitting in my life, that's when I don't know, the relationship just changed.
Yeah.
So that was a pivot point for me.
So pivot points, they could be a rock bottom. They could be a clear, honest look at where things are. And sometimes, when we would do this type of work in counseling, we would, or even with my team, we would really have them take a look at their finances, because oftentimes we put our head in the sand and we're like, la, 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 everything's fine, everything's fine. So we do have to first take an honest look at what's happening and where things are and how much debt we have, or how this unforgiveness and resentment is really truly impacting our lives, or how the eating disorder truly is impacting our lives and our mission. But then we have to start hearing stories of people who've done it, because we are humans, and I really don't think any of us want to trail a path on our own. It's so helpful to know that it's possible by seeing someone else who's kind of where we want to be. Did you have anyone in your life, or podcasts, YouTube? I mean, you can have influence and mentors from people we don't ever talk to, right? And so did you have any stories that you heard of people who had been through something fairly similar that you could relate to, and they made it out?
I remember about a year ago, I was talking to one of my friends who had been addicted to drugs, and it made it to where she lost her job. She lost everything for a while there, and she ended up in jail. And she was sharing with me how when she was in jail, she cried out to God, and she's like, okay, this is it. Like, I'm done, no more. And in that moment, it was her pivot point, and she made a complete change and never looked back. And she's sharing this story with me, and I took comfort in it, but yet I was like, when is that moment going to come for me? Like, I feel like I'm taking a step forward in the fog every single day, just waiting for that pivot point, and I feel like it's never going to come. But it did. And so that's like, God is rearranging people behind the scenes for your life. He's rearranging circumstances in your life. If you trust the process, and I hated hearing that when I was in the middle of it, but truly, if you put one step forward each and every day, that pivot point is coming, where that teeter totter is just going to shift, and the emotions and the feelings and the circumstances is all going to flow in the direction you had been working towards all along.
One of the things that you really, I think all of us connect with, is our mission and our life purpose. And so when your life purpose and your mission became bigger than the fear, you were able to say, okay, I'm not doing that anymore. It's taking me away from my mission.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It would take me away from my mission as a mom, from my mission as a wife, a friend, a daughter, and then my mission in ministry as well. It was I was allowing the perpetrators to continue to steal from me long after the abuse was over. And I didn't want to give them any more of me. I had enough of them taking from me. And so it was time for me to start deciding my future and not let them decide my future.
Yes. Yes. And you guys, so many cool things happen, like energetically, when you make that decision. I know that for me, when I started, I was in a wishy-washy place. What should I do? I don't know. I don't know. And this like for a couple years. And when I said yes to a business coaching program, that's when I drew a line in the sand. I said, I'm going for it. No looking back. Now I'm putting money on the line and time on the line. That was when I created 90-Day U-Turn. It was saying yes boldly to that next step, is when I created it. And it's only been a year that I've created it, but it's the ripple effect of it has been like mind-blowing, and so what I think of is, when we say yes, when we make that decision, that's why I know when people sign up for 90-Day U-Turn, even just that decision to say, all right, I don't want to stay stuck anymore, I'm ready for something new, there's things rearranging itself that you don't even know yet, that are going to you're going to start to see fruition throughout the 12 weeks. because you said yes. And I think that that's such a cool thing. Like God's rearranging things. Invisible people are not invisible people. You know what I mean? Things
It
we
just got
don't see.
weird.
I mean, I
Yeah,
guess they could be invisible. That would be
that's angels. There you go. No, like I remember being in the darkness of 2020, and I write about it in my second book, which has not come out yet. But the darkness of 2020 was just awful, terrible. Can't even explain it. And then fast forward to about a year and a half later, and I meet a woman who is ministering to me. And she's just a friend, just listening, just cares. We do play dates. She has kids, my kids' age. And I'm sitting there with her, and I realize, I probably do need to share with her the truth of my, like what's been going on in my life. And so I start to share a little bit. And this is how I know God moves behind the scenes. She goes, 2 years ago, I started praying for you. And I was like, what? And she goes, I was literally praying for a trafficking victim to come into my life for me to minister to. And I just bawled. It's like, God, are you serious? You remember where I was 2 years ago and you started working on her heart to prepare for me? I mean, when I say God works behind the scenes, he really, really does. And he's putting things together for you right now. If you're not to that pivot point yet, I promise you it's coming and it's going to be beautiful.
And it comes when you decide, like, I'm laying this down.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, all the pieces have to come together. You have to be in the right spot. You have to take those necessary steps that you don't want to take. You have to process. But yes, it is in your future.
Right. Well, and that just reminds me that I think sometimes if we haven't done the hard healing work and we are like, okay, I'm ready now. Let's do it.
Oh
Woo,
yeah.
moving.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I think I drew the line in the sand years ago. And I have it in my journal, like where I wrote down, I am done with this eating disorder. No more is it going to affect me. And then, 3 years later is when I finally made the change. But I think you have to go through those moments.
Yeah. Yeah. There's the healing journey. That's a part of the process. So then when you are ready and able to say yes to the dream journey, you're ready for it.
Yeah, exactly. And you've learned everything that you need to learn up until that point.
Yeah. And again, that doesn't mean that life's like smooth sailing from now on, right? It just means that when life happens, you have the skills to, I call it the eye of the storm. The storm's going on around us. Things are happening, but we don't have to get caught up in it.
Right. Yeah. And I think another thing to point out is sometimes people will get frustrated when your pivot point doesn't come when they want it to come. And I've dealt with that some too. Like, okay, you should be over this by now. And I think all survivors have dealt with that because when you're on the outside looking in, it never looks as bad as what it really is. But you're the one that has the control, and it's yours to walk through, and your timeline, your journey. So don't let somebody make you feel bad for where you're at. You just keep taking that step forward each day.
And this reminds me that you may have a pivot point every day. Meaning,
I hope you do.
Yeah, you may make that decision every day. Like, all right, I am in pain. I don't want to be here. Something's going on. And I'm going to live my best life today. That may be a decision every day to use your coping skills, to take your thoughts captive. And what's cool about that is that even if it feels like a struggle every day, like an intentional choice every day, at some point, it will feel easier. At some point, I don't have to remind my children to brush their teeth. Someday, hopefully in their life, you will not need 18 reminders. But it feels like that with us too. Like we're doing it on purpose. We're being intentional. We've, got our affirmations out. We're doing all the things. And then at some point it becomes a bit more natural. And that's when you can take a look back and be like, oh my gosh, that seesaw finally tilted.
It finally tilted. I think it's important to know that when you are in that point of having to make those intentional right choices, I mean, Denise, for me, it was multiple times a day. It really was. I have written down in my journal times when I would wake up and I'd be feeling good. And before breakfast time was over, I was in a flashback and I would have to pull myself out and function again. And then it would happen again a little bit later. And so it was an intentional choice. And I was so tired. I was so tired. But when you are suffering silently and dealing with all of that, you don't feel any hope. But when you at least have people walking alongside you who are there for you, who are loving you like Jesus, who care about you, who are speaking life into you, it's important to put yourself around those types of people, because when you're in that fog, you need them desperately. And I remember those days.
So one side note kind of question. When you're in the midst of a flashback, is it like, do you want to finish it and allow it all to come? Or is it best to, you want to use your skills and distract yourself?
Oh, you're at, I thought you were asking me, what do I want to do? I want to get out of the flashback and never see it.
Well,
Like,
like,
that's what I want to do.
does it go, like, how does it go through faster? Does
No.
it go through faster if you allow it, or if you try to like ignore it or whatever?
It goes through faster if you allow it. It's
Okay.
just your first instinct is you don't want to allow it because you don't want to go through all of that again. But yeah, it's best to process it, go ahead and deal with it, and then begin your day again. Because what I tried for years was to push it down,
Okay.
and it would still pop up.
Because that's where I think, and like knowing that if it makes more sense when a flashback's coming, to write it down or to let it process through as much as you can, because you do have to drive your kids to school and you are still,
Right.
but if you need to set it aside for a minute, you've got some skills to allow you to do that, but then you
Yes.
know that to come back.
Yep.
But the idea here is not to stuff it down and pretend like it's not there, because we know that doesn't work.
It doesn't work. And then once you've processed through it, you have to step out of it. You have to, okay, that's in, remind yourself you're in the present, you're not there anymore. And then begin your day.
When we do the grounding exercises, and that's when we do the I'm present, and that's when we say that flashback is a memory.
Yes. Yeah. And there's there's been so many times when I've been like, why am I so exhausted? That stuff is exhausting. I mean, it might not be physically taxing, but you are exhausted when you're doing that multiple times a day.
Yeah.
Right.
I randomly, which we know is never random, so I'm going to mention it. I randomly found a poem in my desk. It was like slid behind, and on the floor somewhere. And so I pulled it out and I thought, holy cow, like this could have been the name of the podcast. And it's called Brave Space. And I think this is a really interesting conversation when we talk about pivoting, because it's like we do have to have that honest look at where we are, and we have to feel safe enough and or brave enough to have the courage to do something different, because we know that change always happens from the inside out. We are the ones that are going to step up before anything outside typically shifts. So I won't read the whole thing, but I'll read parts of it. It's called Invitation to Brave Space. Together we will create brave space, because there's no such thing as safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars. We all have caused wounds. In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify that fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and love. We have the right to start somewhere and continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. The space will not be perfect. It is not always what we wish it to be, but it will be our brave space together, and we'll work on it side by side. When you hear the word brave space, what does that remind you of?
I don't know, but it feels good when you say it. It feels more real than saying a safe space.
Yeah.
It feels like I'm not alone, but I'm also using the courage that God has given me to step out of my pain.
It makes me feel like stand up tall,
Hmm.
like I'm going to conquer the world. I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to conquer this task. Start there. And brings up courage within.
Yeah.
And I think if we're in that place of like rock bottomness and we feel like we just need other people to understand and we need that safe place, maybe what we truly need is that brave space instead.
You're right. Speak your truth.
Yeah.
And there's nothing that takes more bravery, I think, than to speak your truth, because you are so vulnerable when you put that out there to how people are going to respond. And it's so difficult. It can have so many great rewards to it, but then it can have so many hurts to it too that can take you right back down again. So it is, that's pure bravery.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Well, for somebody who is making their decision today, like, all right, I'm going to let down this negative coping skill or this coping skill that's no longer serving me. I am going to start dreaming again. I'm going to write about things that I want my life to look like. These are some exercises that we do, you guys. Write down things that you desire, where you want to travel, what you want to be, what you want your family to be. Write out your dream day, write out where you want to be in 5 years. And again, we don't want to cap ourselves because God can move mountains. We just want to allow these dreams to come forth and then make those bigger than the fear that's going on. So let's say somebody out there is like, all right, I'm doing it. And maybe they've said it 18 million times, but today they're saying it again. Like, all right, I'm letting go of that stuckness and I'm making steps towards the life God has for me. What would you encourage them with today?
Don't do it alone. I mean, no matter how much we want to believe that we have the strength to do this on our own, guys, don't do it alone, because you will have moments when you are weak and Satan is loud in your ear and you need those people to hold you up for a little while. There's no shame in needing a village or an army around you. Um, God is enough, absolutely. But God also gives us a community of people who understand, who care, who want to be brave with you. And so don't do it alone. Reach out to people to kind of be your support, to be accountability, be honest and raw. I think those two things. Allow yourself to truly see everything and be raw with yourself about the impact of it on your life. And then find people you trust to share it with and help you with it. Those would probably be my two biggest things.
Yeah. Yeah. Radical honesty with yourself and others can relieve you from so much inner pressure.
Yes, burdens.
Your body knows when you're lying to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And it can feel anxiety and it can feel heaviness and it can feel, and then surrounding yourself with people who can see you 3 steps ahead.
Yes.
And hold you accountable to that.
Yep. When you have that radical honesty, that's when the shift starts to change inside of you. And then you'll start to see the difference around you.
Yeah. And radical honesty is brave. That is
yes.
brave.
Yes. Amen.
Yeah. So what are we talking about next week? What do you think? I don't remember what we said.
One of the things we talked about is spotting a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Yes. Yes. This is really a fascinating topic because we like to believe that the world is a safe place or that people are nice and good and we want to believe they're good intentions, but we also want to have eyes wide open. Mm-hmm. We also want to be able to kind of spot those red flags before it gets.
Yep. It's like the frog in boiling water, you know?
Yeah.
So you want to be able to, and there are signs because predators have so many similarities. I mean, they don't remake the wheel each time. Like there's similarities that you can spot. Yes, you can still get tricked. It happens, but I think there are some signs that we could definitely share.
Yeah. So next week we are going to talk about how to spot a wolf in sheep's clothing. We do have the Dream Life Adventure for the Survivor cohort coming up and we cannot wait to tell you guys about it. It's going to be so much fun. In fact, we are going to look to record a podcast while we're there so that some of the girls can have a chance to share their experience, their aha moments. Not everybody, none of it's required. We don't make, but it is an opportunity to share and be a part of this with us. So we're excited to show that to you when it's ready. But anything else, Rachel, that you're thinking of that I may have missed?
Well, I just want to say that our granny program's taking off.
Yes. Tell them about that. Yes.
And I don't know, can you see this shirt? I'm wearing
Yes.
the granny shirt that everybody's getting. It has the granny in my life. It has her favorite scripture on it, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And I feel like that is what a granny has to have as the foundation of their life. If you can love God with all of those ways, then you're going to be able to love a survivor through their house being on fire. And we've had 7 grannies say yes to our 7 survivors. And so we had a Zoom call with them last night, and it was neat to share experiences. My granny got on and was able to share, bless her heart, all of the things she's had to deal with me, the good, the bad, the ugly, all of it. And it was a radical honesty type Zoom call. And these women said, yes, we are all in. We want to be there for these survivors. And so I am so excited for this program that's just taking off, and God is using it already.
Yes. So the granny program is when we pair a healthy adult to a survivor, really just to be another support system in their life. So Rachel has created a 6-week like a workbook that you can use to get to know each other. So you're not necessarily just like, hi, what's up? But it can help guide the conversation and really get pointed questions and things, which is super cool. And so we request, maybe a half hour or an hour scheduled call each week. But other than that, it's texting, or, your goal is to not to be a counselor and not to be a savior, but to be another supportive adult. And I don't think we realize just how important that is as adults, to have supportive people in our lives. Like, again, we just think we can do it all on our own, and we weren't created that way.
Right. Yep. And actually, that's biblical truth.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then of course we're dreaming. We're like, oh my gosh, now we're gonna need to do a granny and survivor hangout day, and like so a lot of cool things are budding, you guys. We're brainstorming some fundraisers, one in Nashville and one in Grand Rapids, that will be next year. We'll keep you guys posted on some fun things we're doing. We're creating some t-shirts to sell and work with over the next couple months. And so things are brewing, and this is just the beginning. And we just say thank you for sharing and leaving reviews and being such a beautiful blessing to the start of this ministry. So, all right, well, I'm going to end with an I declare. And I think this is a perfect one for today, because we want that dream to be bigger than the hurt. And it says, I declare that God has a great plan for my life. He is directing my steps. And even though I may not always understand how, I know my situation is not a surprise to God. He works out every detail to my advantage in his perfect timing. Everything turns out right. This is my declaration, and this is my declaration for you. Have an awesome, awesome day, you guys, and we'll see you next week. Thank you so much for listening to this powerful episode of Stop Suffering in Silence. If you are interested in booking Rachel to speak at your school, your church, or on your podcast, then please email openblindeyes@protonmail.com. If you are interested in sponsoring a survivor on their healing journey and would like to donate to STOPSIS, then please check out the link in the description box or show notes below, or you can email stopsis@protonmail.com. And finally, if you are currently suffering in silence, or you know somebody who is, whether they're dealing with a current trauma or one from the past, then we will always recommend that you reach out to your local resources and find a counselor that you can trust, because nobody is meant to suffer alone. Have an amazing week, and thank you for being here.